Thank you, Jeff. It's my honor today to present our speaker, who has asked that we do it in this kind of Q&A format that we've used actually successfully in other times at our lunch. So I'm particularly pleased about that. I'm also particularly pleased because I think we've never had as quick a sellout for lunch at one of our meetings as we've had with Nathan Myrhvold on the program today. I think he's well known to a lot of folks, but maybe not to everybody. So let me do a brief introduction, if that's all right. Nathan Myhrvold founded Intellectual Ventures after retiring from his position as Chief Strategist and Chief Technology Officer at Microsoft Corporation here in the Puget Sound area. At Intellectual Ventures, Myhrvold is focused on a variety of business interests relating to the funding, creation, and commercialization of inventions. During his 14-year tenure at Microsoft, he held various positions within the company and was responsible for founding Microsoft Research and numerous technology groups that resulted in many of Microsoft's most successful products. He has extensive experience in linking research to product development and commercialization, which we'll talk about a little bit today. His previous company, was acquired by Microsoft. That was called Dynamical Systems. And prior to that, he was a postdoc fellow at Cambridge, working with Stephen Hawking on research in cosmology and quantum field theory, etc. He holds hundreds of patents and has hundreds of issued or pending patents as well. He has a doctorate in theoretical and mathematical physics and a master's degree in mathematical economics. Really?
True.
Okay. From Princeton University. And in 2005, in recognition of his career, he was awarded the James Madison Medal, the university's top honor for alumni. So why don't we get started? Is that all right?
Sure.
Maybe a little background. Many of us know Intellectual Ventures, or think we do. We think we know who you are and what you do. What was the mission? What was the kind of vision you had when you started up Intellectual Ventures in 2000?
So every valuable thing on Earth has a capital market that supports it. We're in a hotel here, and there's a capital markets around hotels. That means there's people that will buy and sell the land and invest in it, and the building, they'll finance it. All aspects of building buildings have capital markets around it. We're very familiar with the stock market, which is the capital markets around, or one of the capital markets around ongoing businesses. Venture capital and private equity are two recent capital markets. I realized there was no capital market. There's nobody investing in invention. Invention is the spark that's ultimately behind all technology. But if you're an inventor, it's very difficult to get funded. If you have an invention, it's very difficult to make money from it. And there was no marketplace where people would invest in you, allow you to sell your invention or sell it in part. None of that happened.
Right, right.
So I thought it'd be a good idea to do it.
Well, how's it worked out?
Well, one of the issues with invention is it's a long-term process.
Okay.
Our first fund, investment fund, was about inventing brand new patents. We started that in 2003. And it's taken us years and years. Of course, first you have to invent the ideas. Then you file them, and you got to get them through the patent office, and that takes a long time. And then your inventions take a while to actually be commercialized. So we've been at this since 2003 in a very active way. And so far, I feel pretty good about it in a whole set of metrics. We've made a bunch of money. We've invested a bunch of money. We have 38,000 patents.
Okay.
So that's not bad. In terms of filing brand new patents, I think we're number 5 in the United States, something like that, in the patents of interest that we do. So for a little company that started in a swamp in Bellevue, I think that's all pretty good.
And now you're located in a former Harley-Davidson warehouse, is that right?
Our lab is, yes. We've got a laboratory over in Bellevue that was a Harley-Davidson warehouse.
And you have a lot of your patent team, your legal team is here with you today, right?
So you just be careful, Todd. I've got 30 attorneys in this room,
Hopefully,
poised and ready.
All right, all right. Hopefully they're all members. Anyway, sorry. A little bit of background. Two things. One, I'd sort of like you to explain a little bit more about what the company does, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And secondly, what in your background at Microsoft led to this? Anything? What prepared you for that?
I'll answer the second part first, which is at Microsoft. When I got there in 1986, Microsoft had no patents. Their 2 patent applications had been filed, but they'd only recently been filed. And I said, God, we got to do something about this. We have to file more patents. It's a form of intellectual property we're going to need. And at the time, the only type of intellectual property Microsoft cared about, or anyone in the industry, was copyright.
Right.
And so you'd go into the law department, and you'd see these posters with a pair of handcuffs that, copy that disc, go to jail. And it was, copyright was like the 11th commandment, and God said,
When was this, roughly? What time ago?
Oh, that was 86.
Okay.
So piracy of our software drove us nuts at Microsoft. But at that point, in the era of the PC industry, patents weren't on the radar at all. And I said, hey, they're going to be. They're going to be, and we're going to face an issue. And then over the years, that absolutely happened. Okay. And it convinced me that, in fact, there was a real opportunity to invest in invention in several ways. So to answer the first part of your question, okay, we have several different investment funds. We're structured financially like a private equity or a venture fund, in that we will we'll raise funds. The funds are raised from investors, typically pension funds, university endowments, family offices. Stanford University is an investor. The Mayo Clinic is an investor. So we raise that money. We also have a set of companies that will also invest.
You're not publicly held, though.
No, right. not publicly held. No plans ever to do so, because we have a very long-term, illiquid asset. Right. And the reason venture firms and private equity firms, by and large, there's a few that aren't public, is because they have very long-term assets. Anyway, we're organizing those funds, and we have 3 families of funds at the moment. The first is, we call it Invention Science Fund. That's about inventing new patents. So what we do there is we try to invent new important inventions in interesting areas. We have a set of staff inventors that work for us full-time, but most of our inventors have another job. They're a professor at a university, they're retired, they're a consultant, they're at a small company that has to deal with us, in some cases they're a large company that has to deal with us.
Right.
So there we stimulate the invention of brand new stuff. And I can tell you about a couple of our inventions at some point if you want.
Sure.
We have another family of funds that's about investing in existing inventions. So those funds buy patents. Now, it's not always buying, and we don't typically buy them outright, or not always buy them outright. We may buy a controlling interest. Right. But typically the idea is that someone has patents they don't know what to do with. We say, okay, we will take them and manage them, and we'll make more money on them than the other guy would have. Almost exactly the way private equity companies will buy an existing business, figuring that their management and their taking it through whatever shoals that business needs to go through will add value. We have a third fund that's a little bit in the middle. That third family of funds partners with inventing institutions primarily. So they partner with tech transfer offices at universities. Both in the U.S., we have deals with University of Texas at Austin, Caltech, and a whole variety of other universities here in the U.S., but we're very strong outside the U.S. So many campuses of the Indian Institute of Technology, for example, have a deal with us where we help supplant their tech transfer efforts, because many of those universities don't have very much in the way of tech transfer efforts at the moment.
Well, I hope it's not too provocative to bring this up, and we're going to talk about the whole issue of trolls and assertion entities in a little bit, but there's rumors out there that some of the folks who have invested in your company were a little reluctant to have to invest. They invested just to settle with you or other reasons. Is there any comment there? Any truth to that?
Well, we've got 2 kinds of investors. I mentioned we have companies. So one class of investor are purely financial, Mayo Clinic. Okay? Sure. Their endowment wants to make money so they can help sick people get better. There's another set of folks that have a combination of a customer and an investor. Microsoft is an example. Apple is an example. So those folks invested with us, and they also are a customer in the sense that they pay for and get licenses. And it's actually fairly typical, if you looked at a big company like an Apple or Microsoft, that when there's a supplier they think is a really important supplier to them, they may take an investment, because then they can can gain on the upside, and they get a cheaper deal all the way around. Now, those companies didn't join us because of a threat, because the first set of them joined us before we had any patents.
Okay.
They joined us prospectively, so I don't think there's any sense of that. There have been companies that have joined us over the years since then, but I think our investors are happy to be investors. We also have got licensees who are not investors, so we're happy to do it either way.
Okay. Let's talk about assertion and that sort of issue. One of your, I think he was one of your co-founders, or at least one of your senior execs, Peter Dickinson, who I don't know if he's here or not today, when he was at Intel, someone who probably is relatively critical, company is relatively critical of some things that you all do, coined, alleged
they're an investor, by the way, and they have been from the beginning, but... But keep going.
No, that's all right. Peter Dickinson is alleged to have coined, or at least takes credit for coining the term patent troll.
Yes, so any of you who think about coining a really colorful thing, think hard. Okay? Peter thought he was doing a great job to come up with this wonderful, colorful term that he's going to spend the rest of his life having it applied to him.
Okay, well, we all have to, as lawyers and now policy commentators, we have to twist ourselves around to find a sort of a socially acceptable term for this, and I think we've probably settled on
I'm on the board of
assertion
DreamWorks Animation that actually just did a deal to buy the copyright to the entire Trolls thing, so you be careful who you call a troll. DreamWorks owns them.
All right, well, I'll stick with past insertion editing.
But anyway.
It's obviously a hot topic at the moment. Congress is looking into it. There's several recent hearings where they're even talking about trying to statutorily change litigation to come after the more egregious of these assertion entities. You're often, a couple questions. Your company's lumped in with those often, and I wonder if you have any comment or differentiation. And secondly, you've started to assert your patents more over the last couple of years, is my understanding. And is that a new strategy, or is that just playing out the business model?
So the trouble with the term troll is that it's basically synonymous with the word plaintiff, so far as I can tell. But people who are angry that someone else has filed a lawsuit against them call the other people a troll if it's a patent lawsuit. You can find Apple being called a troll. You can find Stanford University being called a troll. You go through a whole list of people who've been called trolls and try to find any commonality apart from one thing: they're trying to enforce patents. Right. Now, we're not apologetic about enforcing patents. Okay? I think that the power of technology comes from ideas. And those ideas are owned by people in a variety of ways. I mentioned copyright is one of those ways. Patents is another way. It's a very important way to protect innovation. Now, there are people who, particularly in young companies in the technology industry, that grew up not having to worry about patents, and they'd rather take the inventions without paying. Just flat out. For one reason or another, whether it's a cultural expectation or it's an explicit business model, they don't want to pay. There's always somebody who doesn't want to pay, even in industries where they do believe in patents. But the tech industry, if you looked at the younger companies, and the reason I emphasize younger companies is if you looked at an Intel or a Microsoft or an Apple, they're all very active in enforcing their patents. It's a new thing. I mean, let's say when I was at Microsoft and I said, hey, we need to get patents, let's file more patents. It was the voice in the wilderness, but eventually it worked, and now Microsoft is doing deals all the time, as they should. They invented a lot of cool stuff. In terms of us, early on, of course, when we first started our company, there was lots of hoopla about us being a patent troll, and I always laughed. We didn't have any patents. Right. Okay? You start from zero. How many do you have? And then it takes a while to build them up. It takes a while to do all these other things.
But you didn't assert for a fairly long time.
We wound up being able to do friendly deals for a very long time. But here's the reality of human nature. If you do friendly deals for a long time, there's someone out there who's going to think, hey, you're a wimp. You're just not ever going to enforce it. So if I say no, I can say no for free. So I don't care that other people are doing deals, friendly, arm's length deals. I don't care about that. You can't sue. You won't sue. And then as soon as you get a bunch of people that think you're not going to sue, you got to sue. Because any any aspect of the law has consequences for actions.
Right.
And if you teach the world that, in fact, yes, you should infringe my patents and paying for patents is voluntary, they're not going to pay you.
All right. Okay. Well, now that you are litigating or pre-litigating, and I've heard you comment before on it, there's a lot of people giving speeches and writing academic papers about the uptick in the huge upturn in IP litigation and this trend and that trend, and that it's actually driving a lot of the policy debate. I've heard you respond that data, you interpret that in somewhat a different way sometimes.
Well, we've done a series of studies just looking at the actual numbers. It turns out in policy debates, you can quote numbers without actually looking them up. I was kind of a nerd in school. I thought you actually had to look them up and do statistics and so forth. The rough statistics on patents is something like 2,500 patent lawsuits have been filed per year, plus or minus a few hundred for many years. Something like 97 and 98% of those settle before trial. Right. So roughly 90 to 100 cases come to trial every year. A fascinating thing is something like a third of all patent lawsuits settle after filing, but before any court action whatsoever, which means the parties weren't able to actually convince each other that they were serious. It's the only way I can interpret that the actual filing somehow triggers a set of activity. So those statistics are not up. The idea that there is a massive amount of so-called troll lawsuits, every time we've looked, we've found that is just false. Most patent lawsuits, it turns out, are medium-sized companies suing each other, medium-sized competitors. The very biggest companies do sue, and when they do, they sue, such as Apple and Samsung, it makes the papers. It doesn't make the papers when two mid-market machine tool companies in the Midwest sue each other, but that's the bulk of it. The most prolific litigators, the entities that litigate, the most prolific one that for the last probably 10 years is a guy who makes products. Right. He makes, I think it's probably a disgusting product, although he's litigious, so don't quote me on that. No, it's a tanning. He makes an artificial tanning stuff. It's basically carotene and oil that you rub on to make your skin look kind of orangey like you went to the Bahamas. And there's these spray-on tanning booths, and he's sued hundreds of them. But if you look at other people who are frequent litigants, it's people who get ripped off a lot. Oakley sunglasses, mag flashlights. Those are two of the most frequent litigants. Why? Because people, particularly in Asia, knockoff manufacturers copy their stuff. Now, maybe Oakley and Maglite are right. Maybe they're wrong. I don't know, but it makes perfect sense. If you see companies on the other side, who are the companies that are targets of litigation? They're companies, most of them are companies where they have a business model. One of the most frequent targets of litigation is Teva Pharmaceuticals. Teva is a generic drug company. It's part of that game. They try to put a drug out as soon as possible. The other guys want it delayed as much as possible. Right. There's patent lawsuits. But you also see a lot of big tech companies because many of the tech companies de facto have a set of policies that is absolutely about incurring patent liability. Okay? They wouldn't put it quite that way. But I used to be one of those guys. Okay? So I kind of know. The tech industry has been about being the winner who takes most. In search engines, you want to be Google. In databases, you want to be Oracle. In photo editing, you want to be Adobe. I mean, you go down the list. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with those companies for doing that, but historically, the big push was to do anything you possibly could to be the winner that takes most.
Well, as a former director, I know because the path of the increase of patent applications continues to be upward and pretty steeply upward. And it's believed, a big piece of that is believed to be the understanding that you have to get lots and lots of patents to be defensive, and a lot of people bemoan the fact that that is a strategy. How do you feel about that?
We did some research on that. So it turns out you can predict the number of patents filed in a given quarter to very high accuracy, like 97%, by the integrated venture capital funding for 2 years previous. Okay. When there's a dip in venture capital, there's a dip in patent filings for the next 2 years when venture filings go up, because it's mostly little companies. Okay? Patents are the great long tail of all time. Mm-hmm. In almost any technology area, take the company you think is the biggest, best company in the world in it, Intel in microprocessors, Google in search engines. The biggest company in a particular category will typically have 3% share of the patents in that area. It's lots of little guys. Okay. And they're filing not because it's just defensive, or maybe it's defensive, but it's defensive because they're aspirationally trying to do something big.
Okay. Well, then what's a broadish question? What's your view, or what's Intellectual Ventures' view of the IP system, of the patent system? Is it working? Do they need, some things need fixing? If not the things we're talking about, what else needs fixing?
I don't think any system is perfect, particularly if you look at a broad societal system. By and large, the public stock market is the way we finance business. We couldn't live without it. But the public stock market gives you the opportunity to have Bernie Madoff. And not just Bernie Madoff, lots of other little issues. So is securities law ever done? Is the SEC ever perfect? No. So the patent office isn't perfect either, as you probably know better than anybody else here. Right. Slightly more perfect during your reign, but
well, certainly wouldn't disagree with that.
When people say the patent system is broken, they're basically making it up. And they make it up because they typically have an axe to grind. And then they typically spout 3 or 4 things immediately after that if you actually bother to look them up, which we do, are just false. They say, oh, well, there's so many bogus patents out there. Well, they say, okay, if there's so many bogus patents out there, then clearly when patents go for re-exam, they're all thrown out. Well, no, they're not. It turns out there's a set that come through unscathed, just 10, 20%. There's a set that are totally thrown out, and the ones in the middle get a few claims changed.
Right.
Okay, if there's all these bogus patents, then surely litigation results show that. No, of course they don't. A CEO of a major tech company came up to me at a conference, and he said, God, how can you stand being this bogus thing? The system is so broken. Why we're being sued on this totally bogus patent. It's obviously bogus. I said, well, I followed that case. You lost a district court. You lost an appeal. You're coming back on remand. You've got to be thinking about the Supreme Court right now. So you have the best attorneys in the land. You've probably spent $25 million defending it. Are you sure it's obviously bogus?
Obviously bogus. As opposed to not obviously bogus.
The thing is, when you have an axe to grind and you don't want to pay, it's very difficult for people to say, I just don't want to pay. Yes, I am one of the wealthiest people in the world, but I don't want to pay. And my company that dominates an industry, I don't want to pay. So instead, they try to cast it in these other terms. And every time you get a broad patent system is broken thing, it's an emotional response. There isn't a fact-based argument you can put behind it.
In fact, you testified once before the House. You said that many tech companies, quote, make a deliberate decision to ignore the patent system.
Absolutely.
What do you think the basis for that is? Do you think that's still the case today?
Oh, there's major household word tech company. I know of one where it's in the employee handbook that it's a fireable offense if you look at the patent database. Okay? And the reason is someone inside the company decided that they might incur treble damages, so they want to be the ostriches that stick their head in the sand and not know. When I heard this, I said, what I'm going to do is you think I'm a bad guy now. I'm going to rent one of those big billboards along 101 in Silicon Valley. I'm going to put patent numbers up there, just scrolling patent numbers all the time.
That's interesting. And nobody thinks you're a bad guy, by the way. Let me ask you about competition.
Yep.
You started out, you pretty much had this field to yourself. There's an awful lot of people who are suddenly saying, hey, including lots of patent attorneys, frankly, who have acquired portfolios or going in deals with other people. And there's a fair amount of competition now for these patent portfolios and the assertion of them, isn't there? How do you deal with the competition?
Yes, there is, and we planned that all along, and I think that's great.
Okay.
You know, if you look at the history of a venture firm like Kleiner Perkins, that's been around for 30 years, their best fund wasn't their first fund, but they had a lot less competition.
Right.
Okay? If you looked at private equity funds, you'd find the same thing. So it's true that when we started out, just the very idea you could sell patents just seemed novel to people. We should have patented it, I suppose. Patents would trade hands, and they trade hands in acquisitions of companies. They would, in the pharma and biotech world, they would, and a few other industries they would. But in the tech industry, like the whole idea you might sell your patents for money just seemed radical to people. Now, that's not, and I take some credit for us doing that, but it was part of a trend that I thought was going to happen, I think would have happened to one degree or another without us.
Right. Are there other factors? I know this trend, as you say, of trying to get more to firmly monetize or securitize patents and intangible assets continues, I think. Companies like Ocean Tomo have been working at it, and their auctions and other things. Do you think that will continue? I guess a bigger question, where do you see IV in 10 years? Where do you see this all going? Where do you see your company going?
Patents are valuable, okay? Look at Qualcomm, okay? 90 to $100 billion market cap in that range, all built on a foundation of intellectual property. Look at the drug industry, okay? Built on a foundation of intellectual property. Oddly enough, look at the toy industry. Most toys, well, it turns out it's not just biotechs. Most toy companies have a relationship to their toys the same way pharma companies do to little biotechs. They license their toys from the wacky people that invent them. And I say that with great affection. They're clearly valuable. The world ought to treat them like they're valuable. And if you treat them like they're valuable, that means you buy them, you sell them, you invest in them. We have given, our company has given more than $400 million to individual inventors in the United States.
Say that again. $400 million?
$400 million.
Okay. All right.
Now, I don't think anybody else, the government's not giving $400 million to individual inventors, ever. Throughout all of history, added up. We have sent
do they
billions.
Do they all have representation, by the way? Are there any names we could? Okay.
I tell you, if at the end of all this I may or may not be successful, but the patent bar isn't thankful.
Very well.
And we also have sent billions of dollars to companies that have patents. We've bought patents from most of the Fortune 50. We've also done it from tiny little companies. So everyone invents things that they are not in a position to productize. And if that's what happens, then I think the best way to make use of that invention is to find someone who does want to take it forward.
Let me get, and we're going to open up for some questions in a little bit, too, to the audience. Let me get a little bit philosophical, maybe. In reading the bio, you worked for both Bill Gates and for Stephen Hawking, two of the most famous innovators of our generation. How did they influence your view of innovation and research, and what did you learn from them?
So at the time that happened, I actually went from working for Stephen Hawking to Microsoft bought me. I worked for Steve Ballmer for a little while, and then for Bill. Of course, Stephen is this great academic. Steve Ballmer dropped out of business school, and Bill dropped out of college. So the pattern was that I was going for people that had successively lower levels of education, but successively higher net worth. And after that, I was stuck. There wasn't anywhere else to go. They're both incredible people, and I've learned a tremendous amount from each of them. Once you've worked for Stephen Hawking, it's very hard to feel sorry for yourself. Okay, you think you're having a bad day and life is miserable, and then you look at this guy who has just incredible physical challenges. I mean, things that just would crush the spirit. Actually, most people who have that disease, their spirit is crushed. Kevorkian, depending on how you view it, murderer, euthanizer, most of the people he helped, worked with, whatever, killed, had that disease, ALS. It's a horrible, horrible disease. And so you work with Stephen, and you see him come up with brilliant ideas despite all of this. And I asked him once about this, and he said, well, actually, it's an advantage. And I'm kind of a blunt guy, and I said, bullshit, Stephen, come on. I take you to the bathroom, Stephen. Don't tell me it's an advantage. And he said, no, really, it forced him to think in really clear, simple ways because he couldn't jot stuff down. He couldn't shuffle 10 papers on his desk. Now, I still think that was in part his rationalization of it. But my God, how can you feel sorry for yourself when you see something like that? And Bill Gates is just an amazing guy in other ways, also incredibly brilliant, incredibly driven. I spent all day yesterday in review meetings with him because we do a lot of things with him. Yesterday we were reviewing a set of projects we do that we have a fourth family of funds I didn't mention earlier called Global Good. And the idea behind that is that we invent things for the developing world.
Right.
You know, the tech industry that I was a part of for so long is about making tools or toys for the wealthiest people on Earth. I don't mean wealthy people in the sense of only rich people in the U.S. I mean anyone in the U.S. is the wealthiest people on Earth compared to folks that live literally on $1 or $2 a day. And technology an invention has transformed our lives. Everyone in this room's life is better because of technical inventions. We didn't actually need our lives that much better. It's fun. I love it. The people who need their life totally changed are the people who are at death's door, the people whose kids die of starvation and so forth. So we have a program where we spend a lot of effort trying to invent on problems for that. And so yesterday, we went at it for 11 hours in straight meetings reviewing all these projects, and Bill is just as focused on that as he ever was on anything at Microsoft.
Okay. What are some of the bigger projects that are coming out of your labs? And someone's asked me to ask you, what is a little bit about TerraPower?
Okay. So when we say we do lots of inventions, one of the things people say is like, oh, right, so these guys are sitting around thinking up internet business model patents. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But we invented a new kind of nuclear power plant. And we have now spun out a company called TerraPower that is trying to build a new kind of nuclear power plant. So if you want to get something that's about as diametrically far from internet business method patents, it's nuclear power. And we're doing it because the world needs to have some efficient, safe, carbon-free sources of electricity. And we don't have efficient, safe carbon sources right now. Renewables are great, but they're not that efficient. They're not very cost-effective, and they have a variety of problems. Like at night, the sun doesn't shine. And we're working on that problem too. Not the way you're thinking.
Whoa.
Although I am a physicist, so no, we're better batteries.
Sky's the limit, man.
Batteries suck.
They do. Absolutely.
Okay, any measure of batteries would show that they're somewhere between a factor of 10 to a factor of 100 worse than, say, a fossil fuel.
Why is that problem so intractable? I agree. That seems like something we should have solved batteries at least a long time ago.
Well, I tell you the most depressing part about batteries. They do get better, slowly. If you plot the improvement curves of batteries over a long period of time, it's a very steady 3 to 6% per year. Little variations, probably 4.5%, 5% is the average. Now, the depressing thing is if you need a factor of 100, you have to wait a long time. And frankly, steady, tiny progress is more depressing than no progress. Because no progress, you might think, okay, well, there's like a new big idea. And maybe there is one, and we'd love to have it, or we'd love to see somebody else have it. And the reason we're doing TerraPower at the highest level is the world needs to try a bunch of radical new ideas. Most of them will fail. But it's the ones that succeed that make all this work. One of the things that I think is really important to tell anybody that cares about invention is I have this story about baseball. I'm not a sports guy, but in baseball they have this thing called a batting average.
Right.
Best batter in baseball has an average like 400. That means they miss 60% of the time. Okay? That guy's not a hitter. He's a misser. But it turns out, in the rules of baseball, the way baseball works, you can miss 60% of the time and be the best guy in the sport. Okay? Now, invention is a sport, or an activity, where the batting average is really low. Okay? No one has a 400 batting average in invention unless they do tiny, trivial little inventions. If you try to do hard stuff, I don't know what my personal batting average is as an inventor.
Right.
2%? I don't know. It could easily be that low. 10%? Most inventions fail. Now, one aspect of that is that's why we invest in big portfolios of inventions. You know, people think, oh, God, they're trying to be scary by having all those inventions. No, I'm trying to decrease variance. Okay, I'm a nerd. So if someone offers you a lottery ticket, and for some reason that lottery ticket has positive expectation value. Real lottery tickets don't have this, by the way. But if for some reason you got that, the first thing you should ask is, how many can I buy? Yeah. Because that's how you reduce the variance and you make this thing work. So anyway, because inventions are usually fail, when they succeed, you also have to try to make sure you get paid. Okay? And you're not just paying for the ones that succeed. You're paying for the ones that fail, too.
Okay. All right. I want to turn the subject to something else for which you're famous for. I think many people know this. You are one of the great, I was almost an amateur chefs. I think in many ways you're professional. And you worked on, for a long time, and published maybe one of the seminal cookbooks of all time, a series of cookbooks of all time, basically surveying the science, the literal science, and the technology and the techniques that are used in modern cuisine. And I'm fortunate enough I have a copy. It's 4 volumes. It's about this big. It's huge. I like to try some of the recipes. I don't have a lot of liquid nitrogen sitting around in my kitchen. I suppose I could get some. But I've seen you on TV. You're probably more famous for this on the Today Show and New York Times Magazine and that sort of thing. Tell us a little bit about that as a project, and tell us about how you got into it and what you found. It's very scientific in as many ways, too.
Well, I tend not to do things by halves.
Okay.
I mean, I wanted to be a physicist, so I wound up working for Stephen Hawking. I got interested in computers, and I wound up working for Bill Gates. Intellectual ventures were pretty serious about patents. My whole life, though, I have loved cooking. When I was 9 years old, I told Mom I was going to cook Thanksgiving dinner. And I chased out of the kitchen. I went to the library and checked out all these books on cooking. And I cooked Thanksgiving dinner. I can do a better job now. But from that point on, I was fanatic about cooking. When I worked at Microsoft, I actually got Bill Gates to give me a leave of absence to go to attend a professional chef school in France.
Okay.
So
but you changed the conversation in a lot of ways, though, in what you've done.
So then after retiring from Microsoft, one of the reasons was to cook more. I did.
Yeah.
And it led, in between my day job and so forth, to this Modernist Cuisine thing, which originally I thought, I'm going to write a book, which is a big book. It's huge. It's like 600 pages. It actually turned out to be 2,438 pages.
Right. It comes with its own plastic cover. And it's so
yeah.
Good, right.
Well, since then, we also have a second book out called Modernist Cuisine at Home. That's much smaller.
Right.
That's only like 700 pages. It's pamphlet-like. And what we tried to do with those books was to try to communicate a couple things. One is just my love of cooking.
Right.
And communicate it in a different way than we'd seen. We wanted to explain how cooking works. And we tried to make the book accessible for people that were just curious. But we also tried to have stuff that was state-of-the-art in it. So we didn't write Cooking for Dummies. Somebody else wrote that book. And I don't mean to make fun of it, but there's a lot of people that take stuff and dumb it down for the mass audience. But I think that leaves lots of people who are curious who didn't want it dumbed down, and that's who I tried to write for.
I think you succeeded greatly. We were reflecting last night on the recipe that you have for cooking the perfect hamburger, where you sous vide the hamburger for 3 or 4 or 5 hours, then you plunge it in liquid nitrogen, and you apply a blowtorch to the exterior.
Yeah.
Okay. Try that. Try that one at home. Does it taste good? I assume it tastes great.
I'd say that's something that is not obvious to one of ordinary skill in the art.
Very good. Very good. We have a little bit of time for questions, and these are blindingly bright lights.
Yeah.
But do we have? I see the folks getting up with the microphones. Can anybody want to ask a question? Please, let's get.
Come on. Don't be shy.
Don't be shy.
Don't be shy. My team does have cameras, but don't worry about that.
Where are you? Over here, over behind you there,
Yes.
Lori.
Now I can't figure out how to get through. Okay.
Hi, so my question is, you said that traditionally, traditional financial markets don't invest in patents, don't invest in inventions. And so I'm wondering, if that's the case, why do you think they don't? If there's a lot of opportunity here, if there's a lot of chances to make a lot of money, then how come the traditional financial entities, institutions haven't approached this way?
Well, if you look at the history of venture capital and private equity, that kind of tells you the answer. Venture capital and private equity both got started and had roots in the early 60s, some would even argue maybe the very late 1950s. And they were radical ideas at the time. The idea that you could invest in a company that didn't exist yet just seemed loony. And the people that were originally started doing it faced tremendous amount of derision, criticism, so on and so forth. The same thing is true of private equity. It was at the time, no matter how clear it seems to us now, that was not viewed as being something that has a great track record. Let me tell you, when we go and talk to our investors, when we first went, they said, oh my God, this is risky, this will never happen. A lot of them said, oh, why don't you just do it for, only raise $30 million first. We said, well, that's why we told you about this portfolio theory thing. We have to buy a lot of them. If we'd only invested $30 million, if we'd been super lucky, we would have thought we were geniuses when we weren't. We were just lucky. And if we had been just average luck, we would have not made any return at all. So it's taken a long time for us to go through the process of proving this. We've had in two of our fund families. We're on our second fund. We'll be looking forward to doing third and fourth funds. At some point, actually, as Todd already said, there are people who are coming to imitate us or to, in many cases, they're not actually imitating us. They're pursuing their own vision of a patent market that is perhaps got some level of inspiration, perhaps not. It takes a while. So why hasn't the financial things, why didn't they all jump on venture capital for all time? If you've seen the Christmas movie, It's a Wonderful Life, poor young George has to go to old man Potter to get money for his business, who then, it takes his business over and it's terrible. That's the way an entrepreneur used to get funded. It was either your rich uncle or his old man Potter. There wasn't a venture capital thing. So how could it be for, 200 years of American history, lots of entrepreneurs, no professional source of funding for new companies? Well, it wasn't, but hey, that idea happened and it worked.
Okay, other questions?
Yeah.
There, Joe Ray.
Wonderful talk, by the way, and I agree with you. The whole troll label has been a major distraction. But I wonder if you can just help us in general differentiate between your company and other companies like Ocean Tomo, Acacia, Intellectual Property Reserve. And these companies have been around before yours, and I just want to know how we can differentiate amongst them.
Well, in detail, they have different business models and they're pursuing different visions. What we do is we try to invest in patents broadly in the technology industry. One of the things people claim about trolls is that they have bogus or bullshit patents. We don't. We have 38,000 patents from lots of great, tremendous provenance of fantastic inventors. There's no reason for us to mess with anything that's even slightly bogus. In the cases, and they've been rare so far, but in the cases where we litigate, we have fantastic patents. And we've got usually another 100 behind that. So now, I'm not saying these other people do that. Other people have their own vision. Ocean Tomo seeks to be a kind of a merchant bank or a third-party marketer for patents. Right? So they had this series of intellectual property auctions. We've bought a lot of patents from their auctions. Their auctions are fine. The problem with auctions are really designed for a product that has sufficient substitutability and a broad enough market that you can get multiple bidders. Lots of people in this room probably own a house, and probably none of you bought it at an auction. And the reason is, if when you go to buy a house, you have to say, well, where do I work? What's my commute? Where do my kids go to school? Where does my wife work? What does she like? Or what does he like if it's your husband? It's a complex series of things, so it's rare, except in a very hot housing market, that you get two people on the same day that want the same house. So the real estate market for houses is a very active liquid market, but it's not an auction market. And there's a fascinating question as to the degree to which patents work in an auction format. Sometimes they work spectacularly well. The Nortel example is one where you say, wow, that one worked. And it worked because you had multiple bidders on each side really trying to plumb the depths and see how things would go. In the case of the Kodak transaction that happened that we were ultimately involved in, it was a different situation. So anyway, Acacia has their own business, and it's evolved over time. You know, Acacia was originally an internet technology company that invented its own technology in video compression and streaming broadly. A lot of companies, probably the biggest problem if you're a startup is you have this issue of, I want to go soon because it's all going to take off without me. Then, oops, I went too soon. And I think that happened to them. It happened to tons of folks. They innovate. They have great ideas. But their ideas aren't mainstream soon enough for the business entity that they formed. But patents have a longer lifetime. So, in fact, it works in those things. Now, since that time, with their original inventions, Acacia embraced other inventions. So they have competed with us on buying portfolios from outside. They have other sources of inventions. Everybody winds up coming at this from a slightly different point of view. Even among the different funds we have in our own firm, we look at things with a different point of view. And that's, I think, typical and healthy in a market.
Great. I think that's about what we have time for. I'm getting the highest.
There's one
the big
more
boss
question.
is giving me that. One more brief question.
It's the answer that's the problem.
You said, Nathan, you said earlier that there's a lot of failure associated with invention. If you had to look at a crystal ball, what would you see on the horizon in terms of a great invention? And number two, what would be the greatest obstacles for being able to invest in those inventions from a policy and legal perspective?
Well, to answer the second part first, all commerce depends on the rule of law. Okay? You can't have a vital economy if there isn't respect for property and so on and so forth. And intellectual property is no different, except for one thing. There's a lot of people who they're brought up believing in respecting property when they can see it and feel it and touch it. You know, maybe it sounds like I'm pandering to the audience, but intellectual property, to me, is one of the better and more sophisticated inventions of all of civilization. It's a realization that, in fact, it's not just gold or some other physical commodity that has value, that ideas have value. And that they have so much value that you should invest lots of effort in them. So it's hard to convince people that something you can't see, feel, and touch is just as much intellectual property, and it's just as bad if you steal it. A lot of people in the technology industry are like teenagers that go for a lunch and they want to dine and dash. And a lot of the discussions, when you come and talk to them, they're people that are saying, well, yeah, but I've been dining and dashing for years now. Isn't that right? The answer is it isn't right. So the policy issues are, we live by the rule of law, and obviously changes to intellectual property law therefore affect us. And because it's not tangible, it's got an issue. But I want to say one other thing. People say, oh, you don't make any products. Who makes products? We make as many smartphones as Apple Computer makes. Absolutely as many. That's not negative about Apple, but Apple doesn't manufacture a damn thing. What Apple does is Apple has a series of kinds of intellectual property. They have patents, they have trademarks, they have copyrights, they have trade secrets, they have this set of designs, they do lots of design work, but it's guys in China that build it all. And the 20th century was about the triumph of ideas in many ways. The 21st century is still going to be about the triumph of ideas. Intellectual property that we all do in this room, that is absolutely central to the world in this coming century.
Thank you for that. And a great way to end. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Elwood.
This could go on for another 2 hours, and we'd all enjoy it and love it. But I do know that your time is pressing, and you have to move on. But thank you so very much. This was really wonderful. And thank you also to Todd Dickinson for making sure that went wonderfully. Believe it or not, you actually have a few minutes of break, and then we resume at 2 o'clock with the 3 different tracks. Track 1, what's the damage? Track 2, patent prosecution and copyrights collide. And track 3, small claims, patent courts, do we need it? So thank you very much, and we'll see you all at 2 o'clock in the track rooms.